The Varathi cruiser Sovereign Fang hung in high orbit above Thyranus like a god surveying its inheritance, and Fleet Commander Grail allowed himself exactly 3 seconds of satisfaction before the business of conquest resumed. Below, the human colony spread across the valley floor in neat geometric grids, roads, structures, agricultural zones, the kind of orderly desperation that species built when they knew, on some biological level, that the universe was too large and too indifferent to care whether they survived. Grail had seen 100 colonies like it. He had reduced most of them to silica. Population count, he said. 11,400, his tactical officer Silas replied without looking up. Predominantly civilian. Municipal defense garrison registers at approximately 200 active personnel. Light arms, no orbital capability. Grail folded 4 of his 6 arms behind his back, a posture his instructors at the Varathi War College had called the position of inevitability. He studied the thermal imaging feed, watching the tiny heat signatures of humans moving through their streets below, carrying supplies, operating machinery, living their small, warm lives in perfect ignorance of the shadow now falling across their sun. And the nearest human military response? He asked. 41 standard hours, Silas said, at maximum drive. The humans have designated this a Tier 4 colony, insufficient strategic value for forward defense allocation. Grail allowed himself a second of something approaching pity. Tier 4. The humans had already calculated that their own people were not worth protecting. He found this simultaneously practical and monstrous, which, he had long decided, described the humans themselves with reasonable accuracy. Begin descent preparations, he ordered. I want ground troops deployed within the hour. This will be a compliance action, not an annihilation. The colony infrastructure has extractive value. It was the kind of order he had given so many times it required no thought. And that, he would later understand, was precisely the first mistake. Because somewhere below, in the basement of a municipal building on the eastern edge of the colony's grid, a single human soldier was sitting in the dark, reading a report he had received 43 hours ago. A report that told him exactly what was coming, exactly when it would arrive, and exactly what he was expected to do about it. His name was Keith Calloway, and he had not slept in 2 days, and when he finished reading the report for the 7th time, he did something that no Varathi tactical model had ever accounted for. He smiled. Keith had been on Thyranus for 11 months, stationed as a liaison officer for the Colonial Security Corps, a title that sounded more impressive than its reality, which was essentially one man, one encrypted comm array, and a mandate to assess and report on colonial defense readiness. His official rank was staff sergeant, though the locals had taken to calling him the Quiet One, which he considered accurate. He had been quiet his entire life. His mother used to say that Keith saved his words for when they mattered, which she meant as a compliment, but which his ex-wife had characterized differently during the divorce proceedings. The colony itself was called Varath's Landing, named for the xenobiologist who had first surveyed the valley and declared the soil exceptional. She had been right. The agricultural output of Varath's Landing fed 3 adjacent systems and produced a caloric surplus that the colonial authority used as both trading currency and diplomatic leverage. This was precisely why the Varathi wanted it, and precisely why, 43 hours ago, an Admiralty encrypted signal had punched through the comm blackout zones and landed in Keith's console with a priority flag that turned the screen red. The signal had contained exactly 4 lines of text. The first was a confirmation of incoming Varathi fleet elements. The second was the estimated arrival time. The third was the nearest human military response window. The 4th line was the one that mattered, the one Keith had read 7 times in the dark, the one that had produced the smile that no Varathi tactical model could account for. Authorization code Shepherd's Gate confirmed. Calloway, K, you have full discretionary mandate. Do what you can. Do what you can. The Admiralty's way of saying, we cannot reach you in time, we know it, you know it, and we are trusting you to solve a problem we cannot solve from here. Keith had spent 43 hours solving it. He was not a remarkable-looking man. Medium height, medium build, a face that people forgot between conversations. He had brown eyes that his mother called warm, and his ex-wife had called unreadable. He had served 14 years across 7 conflicts, accumulated a service record that was 2/3 classified and 1/3 deliberately understated, and had been specifically selected for colonial liaison work because, as his commanding officer had noted in the assignment memo, Calloway produces outcomes in resource-scarce environments that other personnel cannot replicate with full logistical support. What the memo did not mention was that Keith had once held a defensive position on Survey 4, with 11 other soldiers for 72 hours against a Drelhari armored column that outnumbered them 40 to 1. The official casualty report listed the Drelhari losses at 314. The unofficial figure, which Keith knew because he had counted, was 409. He had never told anyone the real number. It did not seem like information that needed sharing. What he had shared over the past 43 hours was very specific information with very specific people. The colony's mining supervisor, its agricultural coordinator, its chief engineer, and 27 of its 200 garrison soldiers. The 27 he had personally assessed, over 11 months of quiet observation, as capable of following complex instructions under pressure without requiring explanation. He had also spent considerable time in the valley's network of irrigation tunnels, the abandoned processing plant on the colony's northern perimeter, and the geothermal relay station that most colonists had forgotten existed. He had not slept. He had barely eaten. He had moved through the colony like a shadow with a clipboard, and when the sovereign fang appeared in the sky, Keith was exactly where he needed to be. The Varathi do not know what they are walking into. Grail's ground force descended in 3 atmospheric transports, each carrying 40 Varathi warriors in full combat configuration, sensor-dampened armor, plasma repeaters, the full complement of pacification technology that had broken 3 civilizations in the past decade. 240 soldiers total. Against a colony garrison of 200 light-armed humans, the tactical models projected a compliance timeline of approximately 90 minutes with minimal structural damage. The transports touched down at the colony's central landing pad at 0600 local time, exactly as Grail had planned. What he had not planned was the silence. Grail had conducted enough planetary landings to know the acoustic signature of a population in shock, the distant sounds of civilians scrambling, the crackle of emergency communications, the particular frequency of panic that species produced when confronted with superior force. He heard none of it. The colony's central district was quiet in a way that took him nearly 30 seconds to identify as intentional. Movement? He asked his sensor officer, Vecthan. Minimal. Some thermal signatures at the colony's perimeter, consistent with... Vecthan paused. Commander, I'm having difficulty resolving the thermal data. There is significant geothermal interference across the entire valley basin. Source? Unknown. The geological profile doesn't match what's in our survey data. Grail's first instinct was equipment malfunction. His second instinct, slower and colder, was something else entirely. Move to visual confirmation. All units advance on the administrative district. The advance began. Grail watched from a command position at the landing pad, monitoring feeds from his unit commanders as they moved through streets that were, impossibly, almost empty. A few civilians visible in windows, no garrison presence, no barricades, no resistance. Then the first unit reached the administrative building, and the feed from their commander, a veteran named Karath, who had served 18 campaigns, went silent for exactly 4 seconds before returning with a voice Grail had never heard from Karath before. Commander, Karath said, there is a human here, one human, sitting at a table in the main corridor. He is unarmed. He wants to talk. Every Varathi tactical model had a category for this. Surrender envoy. Civilian representative seeking terms. It was common, expected, and essentially irrelevant. The terms were always the Varathi's terms, and the representative was irrelevant. But something about the 4-second silence in Karath's feed made the cold feeling in Grail's secondary stomach spread upward. Bring him to me, Grail said. The human arrived at the landing pad 11 minutes later, escorted by 6 of Karath's warriors. He was unremarkable. Medium height, medium build, wearing the undress uniform of the Colonial Security Corps with the rank insignia of a staff sergeant. He held nothing. He said nothing during the walk across the landing pad. He simply looked at Grail with brown eyes that Grail, who had studied significant human cultural material, found difficult to categorize. You are the senior military presence in this colony, Grail said. It was not a question. I am, the human said. Then you are aware that resistance is tactically untenable. 240 Varathi ground troops against a garrison of 200 light-armed civilians. Your nearest reinforcement is 41 hours from this position. The calculus is not favorable. The human nodded slowly. I know the numbers, he said. Then you understand why I am offering terms rather than immediate pacification. Surrender the colony's administrative control, relocate your civilian population to the designated holding zones, and provide full cooperation with our extraction operations. In exchange, the colony's civilian population will not be harmed. The human was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone calculating odds or formulating a response. Something else, something Grail could not place. Can I ask you something? The human said. Grail found this mildly surprising. Proceed. How long have you been planning this operation? The intelligence gathering phase concluded 3 weeks ago. The deployment took 9 days. The human nodded again, very slowly. Okay, he said. I want you to know I understand you put real time into this. I want you to know I respect that. And this was the moment that Grail would spend the rest of his life attempting to understand, the human smiled. Not the desperate smile of someone attempting to seem confident. Not the strained smile of a negotiator buying time. Something quieter and more terrible than either of those things. My name is Keith, the human said. You should know that before this starts. Before what starts, Grail thought. And that was when the geothermal relay station 3 kilometers to the north produced a pulse that knocked out every piece of Varathi sensor equipment simultaneously, and the valley went dark. What happened in the next 4 hours was reconstructed later from Varathi unit communications, colonial records, Keith's own after-action report, and the testimony of 27 garrison soldiers who had spent 43 hours being very quiet and very busy in places that Varathi survey data had categorized as geologically inactive. The irrigation tunnel network beneath Varath's landing ran for 42 kilometers beneath the valley floor. Keith had mapped every meter of it. More precisely, he had mapped how it intersected with the colony's infrastructure, the Varathi landing site, and 6 specific positions that he had designated, in his own notes, as A through F. In the 43 hours before the Varathi landed, he and his 27 selected garrison soldiers had moved enough shaped explosive compound, legally held by the colony's mining operation, to those 6 positions to, as Keith had described in his operational notes with characteristic understatement, significantly alter the tactical environment. The geothermal pulse was triggered by the colony's chief engineer, who had spent 36 of the past 43 hours rewiring the relay station at Keith's direction, specifically to produce an electromagnetic discharge on a frequency that Varathi sensor systems could not filter. It lasted 11 seconds. That was enough. In those 11 seconds, the Varathi ground force lost sensor capability, comm capability, and, because the EMP harmonics interacted with their armor's power regulation systems in a way that Keith had calculated from stolen technical documents and confirmed by reverse engineering a piece of captured Varathi armor that had been sitting in a colonial storage locker for 8 years, partial mobility in their lower limb servo assist systems. Partial, not total. Keith was precise about what he could and could not achieve. What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was closer to a lesson. Position A collapsed the northeastern approach corridor. A mining charge detonated from the irrigation tunnel directly beneath the Varathi unit, moving to secure the agricultural processing zone. No fatalities. Keith had calculated the yield to produce structural disruption without penetrating depth. The unit was trapped, not killed, their mobility-impaired armor stuck in 2 meters of collapsed conduit, their communications still down. Position B was more direct. The Varathi reserve unit, held at the landing pad near Grail's command position, had staged itself beside what their survey data had identified as a drainage infrastructure node. It was not a drainage infrastructure node. It was the entrance to the largest irrigation tunnel in the network, which Keith had spent 11 months noting was large enough to move people through in significant numbers, and which he had, in the past 43 hours, filled with 23 garrison soldiers carrying the colony's entire stockpile of kinetic deterrent rounds, a non-plasma, non-energy ammunition type that Varathi body armor was rated for, but Varathi body armor whose servo assist was running at 30% capacity was not. The reserve unit surrendered in 14 minutes. Positions C, D, and E followed the same architecture. Not overwhelming force, but precisely applied force at precisely the moments when the Varathi tactical model could not compensate. Keith had spent 11 months observing how the Varathi operated, consuming every piece of captured tactical doctrine he could access, and had identified what he described in his notes as the 17-second adaptation window, the time it took a Varathi unit commander, when confronted with an unexpected tactical development, to reassess and issue new orders. His operations were designed to produce a new, unexpected development every 14 seconds. The 17th second window never closed because it was never allowed to open. Grail, at the landing pad, watched his tactical feeds dissolve one by one, not into static, into silence. Units not destroyed, not routed, simply neutralized, contained, removed from the operational equation with a surgical precision that his War College training had not prepared him to recognize, because his War College training had been built on the assumption that inferior species, when confronted with superior Varathi force, either collapsed or fought conventionally and lost. It was Silas, descending from the Sovereign Fang on Grail's emergency recall order, who found him standing at the center of the empty landing pad 2 hours after Keith had walked away. 240 Varathi soldiers, 193 contained, disarmed, or immobilized. 47 had retreated to the transports, which Keith had not mined because, as he noted in his after-action report, destroying their ability to leave seemed counterproductive to the objective of making them leave. How, Silas said, which was not a complete sentence, but it was the only word she had. Grail did not answer immediately. He was looking at the place where the human had stood and smiled, and he was thinking about the smile, and he was understanding the smile for the first time, not as confidence, not as bravado, but as something he did not have a word for in any language he spoke. A kind of sorrow, maybe. The expression of someone who knew exactly what was coming and found no pleasure in it, but was going to do it anyway, completely, without hesitation, because the people in the buildings behind him were his responsibility, and he had decided, 43 hours ago, that the calculus would work. Not 43 hours, 14 years. 14 years of service across 7 conflicts, building the knowledge that could be deployed in 43 hours when it was needed. The human knew we were coming before we arrived, Grail finally said. He had 43 hours. We had 9 days. Silas waited. 9 days against 43 hours, Grail said. We lost. The formal withdrawal of Varathi forces from Thyranus was completed within 72 hours. The colonial authority filed the incident report, the Admiralty received it, and somewhere in a chain of communications that Keith was not privy to, someone decided that the existence of Shepherd's Gate authorization and the details of what one staff sergeant had accomplished with 43 hours, 27 soldiers, some mining charges, and 11 months of quiet observation should be classified at a level Keith was never going to read. He did not mind. He spent the 3 days after the withdrawal helping repair the sections of colony infrastructure that his own operations had damaged, which struck him as the minimum he owed the people who had trusted his plan without understanding it. The mining supervisor, a large woman named Alexis Vorn, who had not slept much either, told him during the repair work that she had thought he was crazy, right up until the moment she realized he wasn't. "What made you sure it would work?" she asked. Keith thought about it for a moment. He was rewiring a relay conduit that he had deliberately shorted during the operation, and his hands were steady, and outside the colony's grids were beginning to resume their geometric, orderly life in the thin morning sun. "I wasn't sure," he said. Alexis stared at him. "You weren't sure." "I was sure about the technical pieces, the yield calculations, the EMP harmonics, the timing sequences. Those were math." He paused, finding the right wire, connecting it with the particular care that people who have done precise work for a long time bring to even small tasks. "What I wasn't sure about was whether they'd underestimate us enough to give me the 4 seconds I needed at the start." And Keith connected the relay. The board went green. He looked at it for a moment before answering. "They always do," he said. "That's the part I've never understood. We show them, and they recalibrate, and then next time they still do it again. I don't know if it's us that's strange, or them." He said it without anger and without pride, which was the only way he knew how to say anything, and Alexis didn't have an answer, and neither of them needed one. On the Sovereign Fang, in high orbit, Grail stood at the observation window and watched Thyranus shrink below him as they accelerated toward the transit corridor. Silas had prepared the incident report. The War College would receive a copy. Doctrine would be revised, assessments updated, tactical models rebuilt to account for the anomaly. He found, to his own surprise, that he was not thinking about doctrine. He was thinking about the 4 seconds of silence in Karath's feed, and the 11 months of quiet observation, and the 43 hours against 9 days, and the smile, that particular smile that he now understood was not about victory or defeat at all, but about something deeper and stranger and more frightening than either. A human soldier who knew what was coming, who had done the math, who had decided, alone in the dark, that his 43 hours were enough, and then had made them enough through nothing but knowledge, precision, and the absolute refusal to waste a single second on anything that didn't matter. It was not the armament that defeated them. Grail knew that now. It was the look in the soldier's eyes when he knew the attack was coming. The expression of a species that had spent its entire existence being underestimated, and had spent that same existence quietly learning exactly what to do about it. He had been smiling because he was already finished. The battle in his mind had already been won 43 hours before it began, and all that remained was for the universe to catch up. The Sovereign Fang crossed into the transit corridor, and the stars stretched, and Thyranus disappeared. But Grail carried the weight of that smile with him into the dark between worlds, and he suspected, in the way that certain experiences attach themselves to a mind permanently, that he would carry it until he died.